Playwright Anton Chekhov famously said, "Never place a loaded rifle on stage if it isn't going to go off." In other words, every detail must be relevant, and every setup should have a payoff. Thus, the narrative principle of Chekhov's gun was born. But it isn't always a gun. Chekhov's Whatever is a podcast where myself and guests watch a movie and try to predict what role Chekhov's gun will play. Welcome to Chekhov's Whatever. Hello and welcome to Chekhov's Whatever, the podcast that makes a game of movies and storytelling. I'm your host, Meg Mazeski. Here with me today to talk about the 2025 dramatic spy thriller Black Bag is Ravi Kiran. Welcome to the show, Ravi.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Ravi is a screenwriter and filmmaker himself, and he recently produced the pilot episode of a sitcom called Failure to Launch, which you can find on YouTube. Ravi, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a filmmaker and an editor, and I live in LA. And I love comedy. I did comedy for a long time, and still do it occasionally. Although the pandemic kind of put a pause on that. But the pilot that we produced it was a sitcom pilot, written, directed, and created by my friend Jay Mandiam, who also starred in it. And so we produced a full 22-minute sitcom pilot about an Indian American family living in Texas. And we're hoping to get that picked up.
Nice. I wish you the best of luck with that.
Thanks. Yeah.
And I feel like Ravi is the perfect guest to have on the podcast because, as he said, he's a filmmaker. So I look forward to your insights on Black Bag.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it.
Black Bag is a 2025 dramatic spy thriller. When an intelligence agent is suspected of betraying the nation, her husband, also a legendary agent, faces the ultimate test: loyalty to his marriage or to his country. This movie stars Cate Blanchett, Michael Fassbender, Tom Burke, Regé-Jean Page, Naomi Harris, Marissa Abela, Pierce Brosnan, and a bunch of people. It's a really stacked cast. This was directed by Steven Soderbergh and written by David Koepp. Currently on Rotten Tomatoes, Black Bag has a 96% critic score and a 70% audience score. So, Ravi, did you have any expectations for this movie before watching it?
No, that's actually why I picked it. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't even seen a trailer or a synopsis or anything. So I was going into this completely blind.
I think that's a good way to go into a movie. I actually did not watch a trailer either, but the movie had caught my eye because it was Soderbergh, whose work I tend to enjoy in general.
Same.
And the cast really caught my eye, Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender in particular. And I feel like Tom Burke is a bit of a rising star. I first saw him in a frankly rather corny BBC series about the Three Musketeers. It was a Three Musketeers adaptation, and he played Athos. But I think he's trying to make the leap from non-prestige television and prestige television to Hollywood. So I wish him the best.
Yeah, he was great in Black Bag.
I thought so too. And also I was intrigued by the director-writer team up here. As I mentioned, Steven Soderbergh and David Koepp, who also teamed up on a movie that I previously covered on the podcast called Presence. And I thought it was interesting how there was sort of a overlap of themes of surveillance in both of these movies. So I was curious to see what this pair got up to this time as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen Presence, but I do like Steven Soderbergh, and he's very good with thrillers, and yeah, I really enjoy his work. Out of Sight, I think, is fantastic.
Definitely. All right. Well, before we get into Black Bag, here's a quick overview of how Chekhov's Whatever works. This is a podcast where myself and the guest watch and review a movie that's new to us. We also play a game where we try to guess what Chekhov's gun will be and how it will play out later in the movie. Chekhov's gun is a plot element that must have a setup and a payoff. The setup usually happens in Act 1, and the payoff typically comes later in Act 3. A Chekhov's gun is also typically a concrete item, action, or person, rather than something symbolic or thematic. And finally, a Chekhov's gun should move the plot forward in a meaningful way. We get 2 points if we correctly identify a Chekhov's gun. We also get an additional point if we correctly guess how that Chekhov's gun will pay off. And finally, we lose 1 point if we incorrectly identify a Chekhov's gun and its role. Whoever has the most points at the end of the movie wins. All right, let's get into it. Black Bag. Our movie starts in London. We meet Agent George Woodhouse, played by Michael Fassbender. and he's meeting with another intelligence agent by the name of Meacham. In this very first scene / shot, we get the long tracking one shot that follows George outside, into a club, onto a dance floor, downstairs, back upstairs, back outside, etc. Very Goodfellas.
Yeah, I think that tracking shot sets the tone for the whole film. Like you're following this guy underground into like, I guess like the belly of the city, basically, where a lot of deals and shady things are happening.
And we're already getting the surveillance vibes, like we're literally looking over his shoulder. So it's really inviting the viewer in to kind of be a spy along with him. And also, I just liked the slick one shot. I think it was Soderbergh signaling right away to the audience, like, hey, this is a pretty stylish movie. And I think it is a stylish movie throughout.
Yes, beautifully shot.
Yeah. Meacham confirms George's suspicions. There's a traitor among their ranks. Meacham suspects 5 people, including George's wife, Catherine, who is also an intelligence agent. I'm assuming they're MI6 agents, since everything takes place in London. They don't explicitly say it, but that's my assumption. George says that he'll track down the rat in 1 week before they have the chance to deploy something called Severus, which would kill thousands of innocents. I asked myself, Severus Snape? That's all I can think of when I hear the word Severus. Harry Potter, you know?
Yeah, that's what I thought of too. I thought, yeah, it was a reference to that, or maybe it was a reference. Maybe that Severus was a reference to something else. I don't know.
They do mention later someone named Severus Alexander, who is apparently a Roman emperor. So I have to guess that Severus Snape of Harry Potter fame was named after Severus Alexander.
That's right. They do mention, I think Kate Blanchett or somebody mentions that towards the end.
Yes. We cut to the next scene where we meet Catherine, as played by Kate Blanchett. George and Catherine are hosting a dinner party at their home. Their guests, the people whom George suspects to have stolen Severus. Also in this scene, we get the impression that George and Catherine are disgustingly in love with each other and entirely devoted to each other. He also warns Catherine not to eat the Chana Masala. It's been dosed with a fictional truth serum called DZM-5. This is my first Chekhov's whatever guess. Chekhov's Chana Masala.
Yeah, I had that one as well.
So I think that it's pretty obvious from the setup that it is going to have a payoff in the very next scene when they have the dinner party. But I had an additional guess on top of that. I think that this fictional truth serum, this DZM-5, or some more dosed Chana Masala will make another appearance later in the movie to another unsuspecting person. Perhaps the tables will be turned on George himself, is my guess.
Yeah, I guess that like food would be a kind of a recurring theme or something that might come back at the end, because there's all these like detailed shots of George, cutting and slicing and, putting in some sort of a roast or taking it out. I forget which one of those it was, but like in what looked like very expensive cookware. So
yes,
I thought maybe that would come back. Chekhov's cooking.
Chekhov's cooking. I do like this scene because of its food porn aspect. We get these very loving shots, close-ups of food. Also, Michael Fassbender is very fastidious in his cooking. He seems really irked by a spot of sauce that he gets on his pristine shirt cuff. I like that we immediately get a sense of these two characters. George is completely buttoned up, literally and figuratively. He's very aloof. He's very cool and cold, whereas Catherine is like elegant and gorgeous and sexy, and they're both sexy together. Just everything about this movie is so posh and slick, from the characters to the setting to the food to the lovely appointed house. I thought right away I was in on these characters.
Yeah, and I think George's fastidious is interesting to mention, because you do get the sense that he might be capable of killing his wife, Catherine, if he has to.
Yes.
If she's the mole. He seems like somebody who's just like 100% about duty and doesn't let, personal feelings get in the way.
Yes, especially in this opening scene. We do see a little bit more of him later, where it seems like he does feel deeply and have deep emotions, but he never, ever really betrays those emotions. And we do get the sense that he's a wife guy in this scene, but he's willing to maybe get his hands dirty.
Yeah. And I think like being like a spy thriller, this is a good spy thriller because it puts us into the heads of its characters, and we I feel like, especially doing this podcast too, is like we're just constantly questioning everything and every
Yes.
bit of dialogue or object, and like, okay, are they, when they say that, do they mean it? Do they mean something else? So there's this constant, searching for like a possible second meaning or the real meaning that I think these characters would also be doing all the time.
Absolutely. Double meanings everywhere. You wonder why a certain statement is loaded a certain way or why it was said to a certain person in that way. Yeah, lots of intrigue. Speaking of the characters, this is when we meet the guests. Freddie, played by Tom Burke, Clarissa, played by Marissa Abella, James, played by Regé Jean Page, and Zoe, played by Naomi Harris. These are all fellow agents at the agency. Freddie and Clarissa are a couple, as are James and Zoe, and they're all suspicious about why they've been invited to dinner. When they arrive at George and Catherine's home, there's immediately tension between George and Freddie. George had passed over Freddie and recommended James for a promotion instead. Around the dinner table, they all talk shop, spycraft, the morality of upholding the greater good, etc., etc. Freddie gets drunk and reveals that George surveilled his own philandering father, tanking his father's career and marriage. But George is unshaken. He's not ashamed to say it. He doesn't like liars, and no one has gotten a lie past him on the polygraph test. A lot of groundwork being laid here. We get a very explicit statement about the George character. He will not abide a liar, which could spell trouble for Catherine, perhaps.
Yeah, if he's able to do that to his own father, then he could very well do that to his wife.
Yes, he could put anyone in his crosshairs. George also has a game for everyone to play. They all need to make resolutions for the other people at the table. Tensions rise, everyone pokes at everyone else's insecurities and secrets, and Clarissa accuses Freddie of having an affair. He denies it, but George confirms it. George has been tailing Freddie. Clarissa stabs Freddie in the hand with her steak knife. I thought that this was an excellent scene. Honestly, I would have been happy if the entire movie played out at the dinner table. For a second, since I hadn't seen the trailer, I thought perhaps we were getting a locked room mystery, an Agatha Christie-esque mystery. The interplay between the characters is so good, and I feel pretty realistic as well, even though they have this outsized persona of being spies, which is obviously not something that most people can relate to. They still felt like real people and real relationships, real quarrels.
Yeah, I think, especially because their jobs are so secretive, I think that the quarrels and things, they're going to have to come out in some form one way or another.
Yes.
Otherwise, they're just going to just implode. So you even wonder, or at least I wondered that, the Chana Masala had that truth serum in it, but you wonder if this would have happened anyway without it.
It did seem a bit inevitable. It had that, I would say, coworker workplace tension. It's actually very funny as well, too. The entire movie is quite wry, and this scene especially, I felt particularly funny. And it's almost a workplace comedy in a lot of ways. So you have these ongoing, long-going tensions between coworkers that, like you said, probably would have bubbled up regardless, even without the drugged Chana Masala.
Yeah, the way they're talking about their, this thing happened, or these people, and they're talking about just like work incidents, this major like geopolitical stuff that they're doing, like coups and things like that, as if you're talking about just like a normal boring corporate job. And there's like acronyms and
oh, totally. Yeah, the workplace acronyms. Yeah. George is as pleased as he can be with how the evening went. He may have overdone it with the DZM-5, but it had the desired effect, so now he just has to sit back and watch his suspects. Catherine asks George what Severus does, but he can't reveal that. It's black bag. This is our first introduction to the idea of black bag. It's almost like a shorthand between these two characters. It's like their safe word in a way. When one of them says black bag, that's the indication to the other that I can't tell you this for professional reasons, for security reasons, and it's sort of a signal to just like drop it and also trust me. So we get this glimpse of how this relationship works having to trust the other to just let it go when one person says black bag.
I thought that black bag might show up literally, like a Chekhov's black bag would somehow pop up in this film. So, because it's in the title and they say it all the time. So you're wondering, is there going to be a black bag at some point?
I was wondering that too. I think that's a good question to be asking. When is this black bag going to show up? Was that an official
guess?
Yes,
I'm going to go ahead and guess Chekhov's black bag.
I think that's a good guess. It's always a good guess when it's, the literal title of the movie.
Yeah.
While they're having this conversation, George finds a ticket stub in the trash for a movie called Dark Windows. He's suspicious and he asks whether she needs his help with anything. He says he'd do anything for her, even kill for her. She says she'd do the same. Foreshadowing. The next morning, George asks if she wants to go see the movie Dark Windows with him. She says she's never heard of it. She also tells him that she's headed out of the country, but won't say to where. He surreptitiously swaps her key card with his. This is my next guess, Chekhov's key card.
Yeah, I guess that as well.
Nice. What was your guess for the payoff?
I don't know. I didn't have a guess. I don't know if I necessarily had a guess for that. I guess I guessed that it would somehow play in. I didn't know how.
I had kind of a vague guess as well. I think George will inadvertently get access to something that he wasn't expecting to get access to with Catherine's card. And this will expose her in some way. He'll be like, oh, she shouldn't have access to that. So that's my guess for how the key card will pay off later.
But it was funny to me that, like, because he didn't have his badge or his key card, that they just let him in. I guess they had the security guy pulled up his picture. I guess because of that he let him in. But that still seems kind of sloppy for like an MI6 type of company or organization.
Very sloppy for MI6. The security guy just sort of lightly chastised him. He's like, security cards are pretty important. And he's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, because in these movies, they have like masks and,
right.
Like things like that, like in the Mission Impossible movies. So, it seems like a big security risk.
They should have done a retinal scan or something.
Yeah, exactly. Thumbprints, retinal scan, something like that.
Yes. Sloppy key card hygiene at the MI6. Yeah, meanwhile, we see Meacham, the agent from the beginning of the movie again, who gave the list to George. He is having a drink at home and he suffers a seizure and dies suspiciously. And then, yes, at the office, George uses Catherine's key card to access her office and computer. He sees on her calendar that she's taking a flight to Zurich and having a rendezvous with someone there. In the next scene, Catherine meets with Zoe, the psychiatrist, for their mandated session. Catherine chafes at being there and tries to psychoanalyze Zoe herself, but she does admit to Zoe to feeling panic over money issues. They also discuss Catherine's loyalty to George and how it's her weakness. This is seeding the idea of suspicion against Catherine. She has these anxieties about money. She also, in the beginning of the movie, was a little concerned about how much money George may have spent on some earrings he gifted to her. So we're seeing potential motive here for why Catherine might have stolen Severus.
Also, going back to the calendar for a second, I thought that maybe that was itself some sort of a, like, Catherine put that in the calendar to try to, I guess, bait George into something, maybe.
Like a red herring to
get
him down the wrong trail, perhaps.
Right, like she knew that he was, like she knew what he was up to with the key card, so she put that in the calendar to throw him off the scent or to basically throw him off the trail or whatever she was doing, or to trap him into something maybe.
I think this is a hallmark of a good spy thriller. You don't know how many layers deep the deception goes. Like, he knows that she knows that he knows.
Yeah.
There's a lot of second guessing as a viewer.
Yeah. Also, there's a lot of that second guessing, but at the same time, they're human beings, so they can't always calculate everything or predict things 100%. So, people mess up. Sometimes people are just who they are, and they what they say is what they mean. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right?
Also, on the other hand, we see in the dining room scene that these are fallible people with human emotions. So even though they may be the best of the best in spycraft, they can also get jealous and angry and drunk. So you never know how these things will obscure their judgment, perhaps.
Right.
George takes a boat out on the lake to go fishing as he contemplates his suspects. Immediately, when I see a rowboat in a movie, the alarms go off for me. I'm like, someone's going to die on this rowboat. I don't know. I still have PTSD from the Talented Mr. Ripley, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think a boat is always going into like deserted waters always feels suspicious. You know, like The Godfather, I think, was it in part one or part two, I think.
Fredo. Yeah, I don't remember which one.
Yeah, that might have been part one. It's been a while since I've seen those. But yeah, like you're just out in the middle of nowhere. There's no recourse. I was gonna guess Chekhov's fishing boat because I thought that would recur at some point as like a important, like maybe somebody's gonna get killed on the boat or something.
I literally have in my notes, someone's gonna die on this boat. James finds George there at the lake and tells him about a delicate security situation. James has discovered suspicious offshore account activity under the agency persona Margaret Langford, which was a pseudonym once used by Catherine. Someone at the agency using that persona has acquired a lump sum of £7 million, likely after selling something. Severus, perhaps? ? And that person just transferred the money to a bank account in Zurich, Switzerland. George remains pretty unreadable, but it seems like perhaps some alarm bells are going off for him, and he asks James to keep this information between them. So at this point, everything is pointing toward Catherine as the bad guy, the person who has stolen Severus. This is the point in the movie where I'm like, okay, it's too obvious that Catherine is the bad guy. She must be being set up in some way, or at least that was my assumption. But my true hope was that George would reveal the setup, but then the twist at the end would be, but it really was Catherine all along.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those like, okay, this is suspicious, but it's also very early. So therefore, it's probably not what they're setting it up to, what it looks like.
Yes. There has to be more twists and turns in a spy thriller.
Yeah, because we don't really know. I think we also don't quite know what the film is going to be. Is it going to be a spy thriller? Is it going to be, I guess, like an examination of a husband realizing his wife isn't who she says she is? We don't know like which rabbit hole it's going to go down.
Yes, is it just a domestic drama and spy trappings, perhaps? Catherine leaves for her mysterious trip, and George wishes her bon voyage in Swiss German. Now she knows that he knows she's going to Zurich, but she doesn't take the bait or tip her hand. George goes to Clarissa's home and asks her to get him live satellite imagery of Zurich off the record. He does a little light blackmail to convince her to agree. Also in this scene, Clarissa kind of interrogates George about his relationship with Catherine. She basically asks, how do you even make a relationship work when everything is black bag? How can you trust someone and love someone when you're keeping secrets from that person? So the movie pretty blatantly comes out and asks a central theme of the
yeah,
film.
And I think that was a conversation where they're talking about like she can't date outside of the profession, but it's hard to date inside the profession because everybody's like they're professional liars. So how do you know when somebody's lying or not?
Yes, exactly.
So it's this conundrum that they're stuck in where they're always in a sense of unease. Like they can't even trust a partner. And what's interesting also about that blackmail scene is that she basically says that she would have done it for him anyway.
Yes.
So he perhaps went a little bit nuclear, even though he didn't necessarily need to.
All the characters have interesting dynamics between each other. No matter how you shake them up or pair them off, there's something new in their interaction. And it is interesting to see between George and Clarissa that she's a little flirtatious with him sometimes. She seems to respect him, but he is so blinded by his job and what he needs to get done that, like you said, he doesn't take the kid glove approach ever. He just goes nuclear immediately. And I think that also demonstrates his inability to trust other people besides Catherine, perhaps. Like he has so little trust that he doesn't even believe that someone would do him a favor just because.
Yeah, and I think he's exhausting as many options as possible before declaring that Catherine is the spy.
Yes. The next day at the office, Clarissa does get George his unsanctioned eye over the sky in Zurich by redirecting a sat-link handover. They zoom in at the location noted on Catherine's calendar. Enhance. I love that we get, the classic, can't you make that any clearer moment? You got to have an enhanced scene in a spy movie.
Yeah. Although it's a lot more, I feel like it's more plausible these days because you have like such good high resolution cameras everywhere that it's,
yes.
you're probably getting good quality. But yeah, if you see something like the 90s where it's like looks like it was shot on a VHS camera, and then they just like
yes.
run it through enhance, and then you can see all these details.
It like magically unpixelates everything.
Yeah.
And if anyone's going to have high res sat imagery, surely it would be MI6. So yeah. I guess that is believable. They see Catherine meeting with a Russian named Kolokov. She seems to be buying something, but the satellite feed cuts out before they can discover more. The major overseeing the satellites realizes that something is up with the sat-link handover and discreetly sounds the alarms internally.
One thing that was funny about that scene to me was the lip-reading AI that she uses to hear what they're saying.
Yes.
And she just puts in like some sort of a disc into the computer, and that's the AI apparently.
That was really funny too. And since, like you said, it was lip reading AI, I expected, I don't know, subtitles or something like that. But no, it like imitates their voices also somehow. Like it sounds like Catherine.
Yeah. So I guess that's this movie's version of Enhance.
Right. What was the Enhance of the 90s is now the AI of today. It can be very hand wavy. It can just do anything.
Yeah.
All right. But before we find out what Catherine is up to, let's take a quick break to hear a few ads. And we're back. In the next scene, James sees Zoe for a therapy session, and we find out she has broken up with him. He warns her not to disclose anything he told her about Severus. A little bit unprofessional, yeah?
Yeah, the whole idea of this, spy organization even having a in-house therapist is to me very funny because I guess they want to see if these people are mentally fit for the job.
Yes.
But aren't these people kind of trained to be able to like get around a psychiatrist if need be, somebody like that?
You would think so. Certainly they have been trained in interrogation techniques. And also we get the impression that Zoe is overall a pretty professional, competent person. And I don't think her ethics as a psychiatrist would allow her to treat a former boyfriend. I think she would probably have opted out of that herself. Like, oh, I'm not going to, oversee a former boyfriend. I don't know. It just seems very odd.
Yeah. When you're like friends with these people and going to dinner and with them, it seems like a breach of professional ethics to do that. And then there's also the whole, like, you wonder, is she reporting on these people, on these employees, what they say? Is she reporting what these employees say to her superiors? Is she a spy to these spies?
Right. You would expect it to be a lot more siloed, I would think, than what we see going on here.
Yeah, and doctor-patient confidentiality seems suspect in that case. And then I guess
Yes.
I guess the whole idea of I think that in general in movies and TV shows the psychiatrist scene is like kind of a trope where that just allows the characters to just blurt out what they're feeling,
True.
or to blurt out exposition. It can feel kind of convenient that way.
That's a good point. Yeah, exposition, it's an easy way to have the characters state plainly what they're feeling so we can get a little bit of interiority without, a voiceover or something. They can just be like, oh, it made me really mad when that happened. So yeah, it is a pretty convenient setup for those reasons. In the next scene, the head of the agency, Stieglitz, played by Pierce Brosnan, calls an urgent meeting. I have to say I liked the casting choice of Pierce Brosnan. It automatically lends a James Bond feel to the spy movie. It evokes James Bond just because we have James Bond standing there.
Yeah, is this what James Bond is doing in his old age? He's
Oh yeah. Maybe he is 007. Yeah, it's a crossover. I hadn't thought that.
And also it feels like way too big of a casting choice to not be important at some point.
Yes.
Because when in that very first conference scene, when George is trying to get the badge back, I was looking and I was like, is that Pierce Brosnan back there? So
Right.
And then later we see that it is him.
That's kind of funny because in previous episodes, we've talked about how casting can be a Chekhov's gun sometimes when it's a big name actor and they show up very briefly. That definitely signals they're going to come back in some important way later.
They didn't just get a big name for one scene early in the film and then that's it.
Especially since I don't think he even said anything in that first scene, if I remember correctly. So yeah, if they were going to get Pierce Brosnan on the payroll just to look nice, that would be a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
Stieglitz explains that MI6 had been closely surveilling a man named Pavelchuk, a Russian dissident under house arrest, but they lost their eye in the sky on him during the Sat-Link handover. While the satellite imagery was out, Pavelchuk was able to sneak away. How convenient! Stieglitz is convinced that there is a traitor among their ranks because how else could the Russian know about the Sat-Link lapse? Not only that, but he suspects that Pavelchuk has a physical copy of Severus and is taking it to Moscow with the help of his right-hand man, the person whom Catherine had just met with. This is also the scene where we get the big reveal. Severus is a technology that's capable of triggering a nuclear reactor meltdown. Things are getting very twisty-turny at this point.
Yeah, now we have some stakes, like some real world stakes.
Yes. Perhaps a little too real world right now.
Yeah, it's a strange coincidence that we ended up doing this episode now.
Very true. Listeners, at time of recording, the U.S. has just bombed Iran for a little bit of context, but we're not a political podcast. We're just a dumb movie podcast. So infuriated, Stieglitz commands them all to find the mole. George is sweating a bit now, and Clarissa confides to Freddie what she and George did with the Sat-Link handover.
When they're spying, when Clarissa and George are spying on Catherine, that guy, I guess he's like he oversees that big room filled with screens. He sees for like one brief second this flash of Catherine and Kulikov on the screen. I guess the computer glitched or something for that moment. Again, I thought that was just like very funny that it's just like the computer froze. That's potentially a thing that could happen here.
I'm sure that even the biggest intelligence agencies are plagued by frozen computers.
Probably, yeah.
People forgetting their passwords. And yeah, actually, now that you mentioned that, it would be pretty funny to just have a sort of slice of life day-to-day story. Maybe the MI6 tech guy. We could have like a spinoff about like, did you turn it off and on again?
Yeah.
When Catherine returns from overseas, Freddie corners her outside her home and tells her everything that was going on. He warns her that George could be in deep shit if Pavelchuk escapes to Russia with Severus and MI6 finds out that he's responsible for the Sat-Link mess-up. At home, George tells Catherine that he thinks he's been set up. She says she thinks she's being set up as well by Freddie. Freddie knows she'll do anything to protect George, even kill for him, in order to cover up his mistake. She's implying that Freddie may have stolen Severus. George is convinced at this point that there are two forces at play. Quote, one is using you to get to me, the other, me to get to you. It's time to disrupt it all. So they seem to have each other's backs. But I was also questioning at this point, when George first says he thinks he's being set up, I thought he maybe suspected Catherine a little bit in that moment. Like you said, like perhaps Catherine had intentionally put that meeting on her calendar for George to discover. Perhaps she was the one setting him up. So at this point, I'm like, does George really not suspect Catherine at all? Does he really think that there are outside forces pitting them against each other? Or is this his way of covering up that he does indeed suspect Catherine?
Yeah, at this point, we don't really know. And, it shows that even these like bedroom conversations can be fraught with, searching for like, okay, is this person telling me the truth or not?
Yes. In the next scene, George takes James out on his fishing boat, and asks him to set up polygraph tests with Clarissa, Freddie, Zoe, and yes, with James as well. I have in my notes, watch out, Fredo.
And I think this goes back to another earlier thing that Clarissa says at the dinner. She says, like, George, when are you going to poly me?
Yeah, definitely some more foreshadowing there. James also has an update on the suspicious bank account. That particular agency pseudonym was actually used by many agents, not just by Catherine. So it could have been anyone, and he no longer suspects Catherine, which is lucky for him because George was fondling the handgun in his tackle box the entire time.
Yeah, that was like a Chekhov's gun for that scene.
Yes, I wrote down Chekhov's literal gun ? I feel like any time an actual literal gun shows up in movies we watch for this podcast, it has to at least be mentioned, even though I feel like it's perhaps too obvious to have as a official guess. I have to mention Chekhov's literal gun. Surely this gun will go off at some point in the movie, I have to assume. But also, we are well into the second act now. We're almost in the third act. So it doesn't quite follow the standard definition of Chekhov's gun, where it's usually something introduced in the first act. But still, someone's going to get shot at some point, right?
Yeah. And also, I thought the fishing scenes are... The fact that they recur I thought it was interesting because fishing is a metaphor for the work that they're doing. They're putting out some bait maybe, and then maybe somebody bites it, maybe they reel them in, they get away. So and they're kind of going in blind and trying to see what they can find.
That's a very good point. I also interpreted it as sort of symbolic of the George character as well. He seems very placid on the surface. You get this very aloof, no ripples exterior, but there's a lot swimming around underneath that facade of his.
Yeah.
I am a little surprised / disappointed that no one got whacked on the boat. Meanwhile, Catherine convinces Clarissa to track the Russians. She also has a clandestine meeting with an American CIA agent. She gives the American Pavelchuk's location so the CIA can take him out with a drone strike, along with the physical copy of Severus. And that's exactly what happens. Over some operatic music, I might add, because, of course, we need some more drama in this movie. Catherine then confronts Stieglitz. She's onto him. She believes it was his plan to leak Severus all along. He threatens her, implying that she doesn't know who she's messing with, but she's unflappable and warns that he's going down.
It's interesting that this also is fish related because he's eating, what was it called? Ikizukuri, I think is what it's called.
Yes, it was a live fish being served to him.
Yeah, and it's and she says that it's illegal in the UK, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like on one level she knows that he's doing something illegal. So it's like that's like a metaphor or just like another layer of her knowing what he's up to.
Yeah, and if we want to extend the metaphor you were mentioning from the previous scene with the lake and with fishing and how it parallels their spy work, if we want to interpret that imagery in this scene here, then it's Catherine has Stieglitz on the hook, so to speak, and she's letting him squirm.
Right. Yeah, she's the bigger fish who is eating the fish himself.
There's always a bigger fish.
And it's not always the person you think is the big fish.
That's true. In the next scene, we get a montage of George polygraphing Freddie, Clarissa, Zoe, and James. He grills them about Severus. And then he invites them all to dinner again the next evening.
Yeah, you can tell, I guess this is like it's going to be that's going to be kind of the climax, this second dinner, whatever that is.
Yes. Not to be confused with second breakfast. But yes, it's all leading up to the big reveal, Agatha Christie style. Once again, all the suspects are gathered at George and Catherine's home. And now that they're all gathered, George has another game for them to play. He's going to ask each of them a question, and if they answer incorrectly, they will be shot. Or at least it's implied that they will be shot. He's putting all his cards on the table figuratively and a gun literally.
Yeah, this time there's not even any food. There's no pretense of this being like a social thing.
So rude. That's bad host behavior.
Yeah, Catherine slides that gun on the table and then it just like slides right into the camera. And it makes a very like distinct sound too. Almost too obvious.
It's got to go off. Through interrogating his guests, we learn that Clarissa is innocent of all wrongdoing. Freddie and Zoe were having an affair. James planted the movie ticket in Catherine's purse and opened the offshore account because he was instructed by Stieglitz to steal Severus and implicate Catherine. James also let slip to Zoe about Severus while in a drunken stupor, but she couldn't have those innocent lives on her conscience, so she told Freddie. James manipulated George into surveilling Catherine in Zurich so that Pavlicek could escape. Meanwhile, Freddie and Zoe similarly manipulated Catherine so that she would have the Russians killed to bail out George. So that's a lot of plot. But basically, long story short, James is the bad guy. He was the one who leaked Severus to the Russians.
Yeah, this is I think where we find out a lot of stuff that we didn't necessarily have any clues about before.
Yes.
I think it could have been anything at this point. It's just all dialogue exposition, the way it's happened. And before that, Zoe says there's a new rug. Why is there a new rug? And that was one of my guesses, like that rug is going to be significant. I was going to guess that was a Chekhov's rug. Even though it's like late, we're late in the film. Like I was going to guess that rug is going to be somehow in play.
Things are going to get messy.
Yeah. So this whole thing about, spilling secrets and telling the truth, James just got drunk and did it. No truth serum needed. And I think that speaks to something that I think they know, even if they kind of believe or say they believe in, the causes that they're working for. I think they also have some idea on some level that they're doing bad things, and
yes,
that they self-medicate, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex, because I think it's implied that Freddie is like addicted to pills or something.
Yeah, and Clarissa is taking ecstasy, and she's also been unfaithful. That's how George was able to blackmail her, or intended to blackmail her. So yeah, everyone has their vices that is their outlet to let off this steam.
And sometimes you don't even need like sophisticated spycraft to get secrets or to find out secrets from people. Sometimes people just spill it accidentally on their own because of their own, mistakes.
Yes. As I was explaining the reveal, the exposition here, it felt very cumbersome to me, not only because I was just, and here's everything that happened and here's the minutia of the plot, but also because at the end of the day, the plot and the machinations of Severus being stolen is kind of the least interesting part of the movie, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
The more interesting thing is the character dynamics, like you were saying, and what makes these characters tick, what makes every one of these people human and fallible. That's the really compelling part of the movie. And the movie does do that very well, and I think in a sophisticated way. And the whole spycraft nuclear weapon meltdown thing is just sort of, I feel, ancillary to all of the character dynamics, which I think are done quite well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, the whole like Severus thing is it's just a MacGuffin to try to explore these people's dynamics in a they trust each other, they don't trust each other, they don't know who to trust. Do they have real friends? Can they even count on their loved ones?
Mm-hmm. And you were saying you got the impression that these characters have a sense innately that they're doing something bad or have done something bad, and therefore they seek out these vices to sort of like release that guilt. The movie does present this idea of, when do the ends justify the means? Are these good people doing bad things for good reasons, or are they bad people doing bad things for bad reasons? It's a little bit ambiguous, and I'm okay with it being ambiguous and having gray area as to whether we're supposed to wholly root for all these people or not.
Yeah, I think that's also a conundrum that's inherent to the spy movie, because obviously like there's a huge propagandistic aspect to spy movies, because you're supposed to root for these spies and assume that the thing that they're working for is actually a force for good. Like they're working to, and there's like some evil out there that's about to kill a bunch of people. And of course, if you know anything about history or the present of these organizations, you know that they're an imperial colonial arm, basically. And if you look, and you were talking about the attacks on Iran, and you can go back all the way to, was it the 70s when the CIA installed the Shah, because Iran was, basically any time a country tries to assert its sovereignty away from the Western colonial powers, the CIA and all these other MI6, and whenever these countries in Asia or Africa or wherever, or Middle East, try to assert some sort of independence away from the West's colonial grip, then that's when they send in the CIA and MI6 and all these spies to try to overthrow those governments and install Western-friendly leadership.
To quote another Chekhov's Whatever movie, Back in Action, I could go for a little cooing. So yeah, George and Catherine, I assume, also like a good coup. This movie isn't really an indictment of any way of MI6 or of England or of colonialism. That's not really within the scope of this movie, I guess. It's a little bit more zoomed in on these two individuals who I think at the end of the movie, we are meant to be rooting for.
Right. Yeah, I feel like this could be, I feel like it's just using that basically as a setting to explore something else. These ideas of like trust and solidarity and loyalty, and can you trust anybody? That you could set this within the mafia. You could set this probably within like a corporation, even just like a tech company or something. You could do something very similar.
Yes. These are very common themes in mafia movies. I think it's no surprise that we've seen a lot of allusions to Goodfellas and The Godfather in this movie, because it does have a lot of overlap in those ideas of trust and love and loyalty, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a subtle way of, maybe, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but I think that those parallels speak to the parallels between, something like the mafia and these international spy organizations or the police or whatever.
That's a good point. James clearly thinks that he has done the right thing for the right reasons, and he says, in fact, that he would do it again. And now that the cat's out of the bag, James grabs the gun, and even though he stands by his decision to leak Severus, he says that George can't prove anything. But George reveals that the entire conversation and confession has been recorded. James points the gun at George, pulls the trigger, but only fires blanks. Catherine whips a gun out of her purse and shoots James right between the eyes, killing him. This is the culmination of all the foreshadowing of Catherine saying that she would kill for George, and sure enough, she did.
Yep, and she pulled that gun out of her bag.
Was it a black bag?
It wasn't black. It was a lighter color. I think if it was a black bag, that would have given it away. But I think there was a close-up of her putting the bag down early in the scene, if I recall correctly.
I did rewind to see if it was in fact a black bag, and it wasn't. I guess they thought that'd be too on the nose.
Yeah, that scene, to me, it felt like surely James would have known that gun was not going to be loaded. Why would it just felt like very convenient to me that he pulls this gun, tries to kill George, and then it's just blanks. Of course it would be. We, the audience, know that, right?
Yes. And also, I guess he could have gotten caught up in the heat of the moment, but unless he planned to kill everyone in that room, it doesn't seem like it would have really helped him at all to just shoot George. Unless he was just so pissed off at George that he's like, I'm taking you with me. So they wrap up James's body in the new rug and throw him in the lake. But that rug really tied the room together. I do appreciate that James does end up dead in the lake after all. It just didn't play out quite the way I thought it might have.
Right.
No one got killed on the boat, but a body did end up in the lake.
Yeah, very much like the mafia would do. Or at least they do in the movies that I've seen. When Catherine shoots James at that point, she says, after that, I don't mind what you two did. You saved lives, but don't fuck with my marriage again.
Mm-hmm. What's the opposite of a wife guy? She's whatever that is.
Is husband lady a thing? Or husband woman?
I like husband lady. I don't know. It's not quite as catchy, but we could try to make it work.
Yeah.
In the next scene, Catherine confronts Stieglitz in an elevator at work and slyly suggests that he should step down. But he ends up getting all the credit for stopping Severus. For now, Catherine has her sights set on his job. In our final scene, Catherine and George remain happily, disgustingly in love. He says he never doubted her. And Catherine innocently inquires about whether that £7 million that James stole is still in the bank account. It is. They kiss. The end. So they certainly get their happily ever after.
Yeah, at least in the end of this movie, I
That's true.
I did get the sense that since Catherine is basically angling for Stieglitz, I got the sense that, in 10 to 20 years, there'll be another Catherine who is trying to take, this Catherine down. So you're never, even if you ascend to those high places in the organization, you're still never really completely safe.
And also, they can never, the movie suggests that they do completely trust each other. And George says that he never doubted her. And I think that's maybe a bit too simplistic of an ending. I think it's more interesting if their loyalty was actually tested at some point. I do find it a little bit disappointing, if we are to believe George, that he literally never doubted her for even a moment, then what really was the central tension of the movie? We're led to believe it's, can you trust the person you're closest to? And the movie seems to kind of definitively say, yes, you can. I mean, maybe it's not quite so definitive. There is more nuance, but I could have seen more avenues in this movie where maybe George did have an actual legitimate moment of crisis where he truly had to question Catherine's loyalty to him and his loyalty to her.
Yeah, I felt the same way. There was never really a point where he really puts her through the ringer because he has suspicions about her. And he's so stoic and he's kind of a blank slate that, yeah, you can maybe see a little bit of suspicion, but you never, I think maybe, I don't know if it's necessarily right for this movie, but maybe there's a scene where he is somehow interrogating her and then it turns out that, yeah, maybe she was trustworthy after all, even though he didn't trust her. Something like that.
A polygraph scene with those two characters would have been really interesting. Something that I think the movie did quite well was it was like a sexy movie. There was chemistry. Like, even though the Fassbender character is very buttoned up, there's still this tension, sexual and otherwise, between them. And I feel like a polygraph scene could have been like pretty flirtatious and fun. Maybe that was a bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that could be fun. Yeah.
And like I said before, I did think this was a quite funny movie. The writing was very slick, in my opinion. The dialogue was multi-layered. Again, I really enjoyed the cast and the characters. I just love Tom Burke. I think he did such a good job in this movie.
Yeah. He was great. This kind of dirtbaggy kind of guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to the Zoe character, the psychiatrist, I think they met. So George, I think, says that her religious convictions that, wouldn't allow her to, cause the deaths of, thousands of innocent people. But it goes back to the purpose of the organization, and, they do kill a lot of people. So
right.
You wonder if there's a bit of, okay, is the film, are the filmmakers saying something about the idea that you think you're doing good? Like your own view of your own morality, or are they just going along with the idea earnestly that she actually was the conscience of these people, or she had a conscience?
Yeah, that's a good question. The movie certainly poses the question of, I guess it's sort of like subjective morality, and every character seems to have a different sliding scale of what they find morally and ethically acceptable versus what they don't. Like, sometimes it's okay to lie, or in James's case, sometimes it's okay to steal a weapon of mass destruction if it's going to end a war. So I think that's another strength of having the ensemble cast. Like, you can see Zoe's morality contrasted with the other characters' sense of morality, and I don't think it does come down one way or the other of like, well, this character is right and this character is wrong necessarily.
Yeah, and I think it is kind of a litmus test for what you bring to the themes of the film. Like if you're kind of pro, these kind of organizations, spy organizations, spy organizations, then you might not really, the morality of what they're doing, you probably would never even question it. But
Hmm.
if you have a more critical view of them, as I do, then you start to, I think you start to see some, you can read some of the complicated, messy moral quandaries that are happening in the film.
Totally. And something that I brought to this movie, or a lens through which I interpreted what the movie was saying, was just its exploration of marriage, because I think they played with this in a very fun way. We already talked a lot about, like, can you love someone you don't fully trust, or do you fully trust someone even if they don't tell you everything? And on a more, I guess, on a lighter sort of interpretation of that, I think the movie sort of says in a fun way, like, maybe a bit of intrigue in a marriage is good. Or maybe you don't have to be a completely open book to your spouse. Like, maybe it's okay to have something secret to yourself. I'm not saying that the movie is like, yes, you should cheat on your spouse and kill someone like people in this movie have done. I don't think it's saying that, but
Right.
I think it is asking, like, is intrigue something important to have in a romantic relationship?
Yeah, if you take away, I think also, yeah, just taking away any sort of like political bent to the movie or an interpretation. Yeah, it is very much about, like, in this world where spouses don't trust each other, romantic partners don't trust each other, maybe you should have that, like, unwavering commitment to them,
Hmm.
whether or not you're both spies. Like, you could just be two regular people,
Right. Hmm.
and you should have that trust between you. It's a very absurd situation that's in the film, of course, because I think in real life, if there were two married people that were spies, they would probably have a level of distrust to the other person. You're always going to be wondering, okay, do they even love me? Are they spying on me for somebody, for some other organization?
Right.
But yeah, as a metaphor for marriage overall, yeah, I think it kind of works in that sense in the movie.
And ultimately, we've talked about a lot of serious themes here that I think are present in the movie. I don't think we're, reading too much into it. But on the other hand, I just thought this was a fun movie. It was, it was a bit of a adventurous thrill ride. So I enjoyed that about it.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty solid film. Yeah.
Did you like it overall, would you say?
Yeah, I liked it. I wouldn't say I loved it, but yeah,
Hmm.
I had a good time with it, and I was, always intrigued by, each development in the film and what was happening next, for sure. And I like the characters. I do think that the cast was also really excellent. I think Kate Blanchett especially is
Yes.
great at, there's like that kind of playful side, that undercurrent to her performances.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think she always has like an edge to her that I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, she has a sort of intrigue to her, always a sort of almost an etherealness. I don't know. Maybe I just always think of her as Galadriel. I can't un-Galadriel her ever, which is a compliment, by the way. But I do think also this is a movie that would reward rewatching. I don't know if I will rewatch it, but you mentioned going into the final reveal climax dinner scene. We basically get an exposition dump laying it all out, saying everything that happened and things that maybe weren't totally signposted for the audience before. So knowing how the movie ends, I think that it would be enjoyable to watch again and see what breadcrumbs were there and how much you perhaps could have put the pieces together, or if it's just something that you could do in hindsight.
Yeah, I agree. I would be curious to see if maybe more was breadcrumb throughout than I thought, initially.
Hmm.
Because, like, I guess my initial view of that ending was like, okay, all the rest of the movie could be the exact same, but you could have easily written it in such a way that this other character was the James character, instead.
Yeah, going into that dinner scene, I can't say that I had a firm guess as to who the bad guy was. Did you?
No, I didn't have any guesses either.
The best I could guess is maybe Zoe, just because she seemed the most innocent. And a lot of times in a mystery, it's the person who seems the most innocent who is actually the culprit. What I really hoped was that Catherine was the villain all along, but alas.
Yeah, I did think that, yeah, the flip side of that is also that Freddie was kind of the obvious dirtbag.
Yes, exactly.
So, and he had that motive because he was passed up for that promotion. So that would have also been too obvious.
I agree. Yeah, I was like, it's definitely not Freddie because it is too obvious. This movie also got on my radar because it was topping a bunch of streaming lists, like a bunch of people were watching it. And also from word of mouth, a lot of people were saying what an excellent movie it was. But I think I fall about where you did. I think it was a good movie. Not my favorite of Soderbergh's, but great cast, great performances. It's a very nice movie to look at. Very slick, very stylish. You know, he didn't pull any cinematographical punches, and very expensive feeling movie, which is always kind of fun and always something you want in a spy thriller. You want to have this sort of like escapism to these like this posh secret spy world that is actually very glamorous and elegant and expensive, which is probably not realistic.
Yeah, it's very much, in some ways it's like an anti-spy movie because so much of it is like, okay, they're talking, like that dinner scene, they're just talking about this, this major incident in Syria, which actually happened, and they're talking about it as if it was like about like an IT outage in their office. And then,
Yes.
like you go to the office and it's just a bunch of computers and cubicles and desks and
Right.
conference rooms. And yeah, I guess a lot of the nuts and bolts of what they're doing is so mundane. It's kind of, that becomes kind of funny in and of itself. It's not like a lot of, and even like the globetrotting part of it is just like, oh, there's a calendar entry. Okay, I got to go
Right,
here.
right.
And you go somewhere, you sit on a bench, and that's kind of her job for that mission.
Yeah, it kind of demystifies it in some ways.
Yeah, it's not a lot of like hopping out of airplanes.
Yeah, probably not a lot of jumping out of airplanes, not a lot of evenings drinking and dancing and wearing cocktail dresses. Probably not not the reality of spycraft.
Yeah. I do appreciate when a movie is just kind of like well crafted,
Yes.
and you can enjoy the performances, and the writing is like, even on a very basic level is interesting and intriguing, even if it's not like the greatest movie in the world. At least it's like there's a certain level of craft and thought put into it that makes it interesting. I appreciate a quote unquote normal or a regular movie, that's not like a part of a big franchise or trying to be a blockbuster or something. Sometimes you just need to see a solid, well-crafted 90-minute movie.
I agree. And it was almost exactly 90 minutes, which I always appreciate. It definitely was a well put together movie. I completely agree with that. It's technically very sound, like you said. It's a good movie. It's well made. I don't think I will remember it 3 years from now.
Yeah, same. But those movies hit a spot sometimes,
Yeah. It was a good use of my evening.
Yeah. I feel like also it's not often you see movies where these days where you really get to see the stars or the cast shine, at least as far as like Hollywood movies are concerned. You really could just enjoy the performances, and in a way that sometimes a bigger movie they kind of get lost in.
Yeah, and it had good tension without having to rely on your stereotypical action scenes that you might see in a spy movie. So, we don't have car chases, we don't have shootouts. There is some shooting, but no punching shootouts or anything like that. So I did also appreciate that it was a pretty contained movie and was able to entertain primarily through dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same.
So if you found yourself in a spy agency, which it sounds like you wouldn't, but what would be your asset? What would be like your thing?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not super technical, so I don't think I could be like a programmer or anything like that. I couldn't be Clarissa. I don't even know all the roles in an organization like that, but maybe I could probably be the shrink.
Oh, the shrink. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I guess sadly MI6 probably doesn't have much need for a comedian.
Yeah, they don't have any need for a comedian or a podcaster.
They should rethink that. All right, well, that's going to do it for Black Bag. Now we're going to move on to the game and find out who won. Okay, we both had a similar first guess. I guessed Chekhov's Chana Masala, and you guessed Chekhov's Cooking. I think we can both agree that this did not have a payoff, unfortunately. Yeah. I would have loved to have seen that Chana Masala come back. The next guess was yours, Chekhov's Black Bag. Again, I think a good guess. It was right there on the label, as they say. But alas, it was more a metaphorical idea than an actual literal gun of any kind.
Yeah. It was more metaphorical about the lifestyles they live. Although there was that bag, it wasn't a black bag.
It's true. There was a purse containing a Chekhov's gun. We both guessed Chekhov's key card. Bunch of misfires here. It was important for the next scene, but it's not like it had a setup and then a later unexpected payoff or anything like that.
Yeah, there wasn't necessarily anything that was seeded early in the first act that came back. The third act was there.
I don't think there was really. Next, Chekhov's fishing boat. I would say this probably wasn't a Chekhov's whatever either. It was like a setting, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I feel like maybe if somebody was killed, if like James was killed on the boat in the end,
yes,
then I think it would count.
I agree.
But that was just a place to dump his body.
Yes, if the setting itself had been where the climactic action took place, I think that perhaps could have pushed it into the Chekhov's gun territory. And finally, Chekhov's rug. It did have the setup and then, the payoff of James's body being wrapped up in there. I would perhaps make the argument that it's not a Chekhov's gun only because the setup and the payoff were like back to back. It was like they mentioned the rug and then the payoff is kind of within the same scene almost. And it's all in Act 3.
Yeah, it was all because it was within like a few minutes, and it also felt like very telegraphed for how not a big deal it was.
Right. It was kind of a joke, ultimately, I would say. A funny joke. But yeah, a joke. Maybe not that important to the plot.
Yeah.
But also, I feel bad. I like to try to be nice to the guests, and I feel like I'm being harsh.
No. That's part of the fun, right?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Was there anything else in the movie that you felt was a Chekhov's gun that maybe we missed?
Yeah. So this is one I definitely missed. I don't know if you missed it and didn't mention it, but this is one I missed was the little thumb drive that Severus was on, was a little red soccer ball.
Oh.
And we see James kind of fondling it in his hands during the psychiatrist scene where he and Zoe break up. But I remember seeing that shot, but I didn't give it any thought. I just thought he was just like fidgeting with something. And then later we see that was Severus because we see a close-up of it melting in after the drone attack on Kulikov's car. So I was like, oh, he had that the whole time.
That's a really good catch. I did not notice that. That is clever. I was questioning after watching this movie, were there any Chekhov's guns? Before you said this, my answer was no, there weren't any. But now that you've pointed that out, I think that might have been the one and only Chekhov's gun was the little red soccer ball. I did not pick up on it, though.
Yeah, I didn't either.
See, that's the problem with sometimes watching higher caliber movies for this podcast is that usually the less conventional of a movie it is, or the less genre of a movie it is, the less likely it is that there are any signposted Chekhov's guns. Like it tends to show up more often in genre films, in popcorn films. Very seldom shows up in things that are nominated for Best Picture, for example. So there is that drawback, but hey, at least we watched a pretty good movie.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Since you did discover the one Chekhov's gun in the movie, I'm going to award special points to you, special dispensation.
Oh, thank you.
All right, give me just a moment while I tally the points. Beep, boop, beep. All right, unfortunately, even with special dispensation, you have -4 points, Ravi, and I have -2 points. Which I guess technically makes me the winner, although it does not. It feels like a Pyrrhic victory.
Well, congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I feel like you had a good strategy. You guessed a lot of things, which I appreciate. I appreciate you going for it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
It was so much fun. I would love to have you on again sometime. In the meantime, where can the listeners find you online?
You can find me on IG. My handle is @suddenlyravi, @suddenly RAVI. Not that I'm a huge IG poster, but yeah, I'm there. I have the account.
And I will also include a link in the show notes to Failure to Launch, the sitcom pilot episode that you have produced.
Yeah, please watch it. Yeah,
everyone, please go check it out. And also do please like and subscribe to Chekhov's Whatever on YouTube as well. It really helps me out. So thanks again for listening. And until next time, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Chekhov's Whatever. Go to chekhovswhatever.substack.com to follow along with the podcast. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a positive review. You can also find video clips and full audio episodes on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe at Chekhov's Whatever. And finally, you can send email to chekhovswhateverpodcast@gmail.com. All right, let's end this show with a bang.